Hi friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today I have another chatty kind of video where I'm going to be talking all about cult classics I don't have in my collection, along with a couple that I eventually added to see if they were worth the hype or not. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So starting with the cult classics I don't have, I actually wanted to take a moment to talk about some mainstream polishes. As you might know, my collection is very large, but only about 5% is mainstream, and I feel like I'm just missing so many cult classic shades. So some of the first ones that come to mind are like OPI's Strawberry Margarita, which is this beautiful hot pink. I feel like it's probably surprising that I don't have this one, but maybe not, because you already know that I just have so many other hot pink creams. I still can't help but always swoon over swatch photos of this whenever I see it, especially once the weather starts to warm up. I also just love the name because I love a margarita. So this is one that always tempts me because it just feels so perfect and up my alley, but I'm just I don't need another hot pink. In a similar vein, there's also Cajun Shrimp by OPI, which is more of this hot red, orange, coral kind of color, I think. And it's another one I feel like I see every single summer and I always love the swatches of, but it's one of those red oranges I feel that I'm likely not gonna love on me, but I still will love it on other people. And for a darker shade, there's Malaga Wine. I adore deep, dark wine reds, especially for fall, and this is another classic. But as you know, I already have a couple of these super dark, vampy reds in my collection, and while I do love wearing it in the fall, I don't personally see the need to have so many of them, even though I know there are subtle differences and nuances with the undertones. But I feel like with those types of reds, sometimes they can just be so dark they look black in most lighting. So it's an easy pass, when it comes to actually adding it to my collection, but I definitely always think about it every single fall. Then for Essie, I feel like one of their cult classics that's so surprising that I don't have is Fiji, which is this super soft baby pink, which actually I know that they changed the color or formula a couple of years ago, so I don't remember if the new version is more pink or less pink than it used to be. So either way, it is annoying that they did that because obviously the color was so nice before, but I feel like I like both versions. So let me know if you were Team Fiji and if you prefer one version over the other. When it comes to darker Essie shades, I always think of Smokin' Hot as one of those that I'm like, how do I not have this in my collection? It's just this beautiful grayed out purple shade. It's so gorgeous and I love those types of shades for fall. And I don't think I have anything that's quite like a dupe, at least to the point where it's grayed out like Smokin' Hot is. I definitely have a lot of dark purples, but I love when they're grayed out like that. But I don't know, it's just another one that I never added, even though I know everybody always talks about that shade. That's another one that I feel like is always pulled out during the fall season, along with a shade like Chinchilli, which is another very popular gray. I mean, maybe that one's more taupe than a true gray, but it's in that family. And it's another gorgeous one that I feel like is such a staple in so many people's collections. But if you did watch my favorite grays video, you know that I talked about gray being one of those colors I don't really gravitate to often at all. It's maybe one of my least worn colors, but I still do have such a soft spot for some beautiful grays in my collection. I think at this point, I obviously just gravitate more towards shimmers or flakies, specialty finishes in general, as opposed to creams. Now, when it comes to indie polishes, some of these may not be surprising, especially if you watch a lot of my videos because I've talked about them before. But one of the first cult classics that I think of that I don't own, and I'm not sad about it, is Polish for Days, Goblins and Ghoulies. This one came out a couple of years ago, I believe, for Polish Pickup, and it came back, I'm pretty sure, last year for Rewind. And it is this really glowy blue shimmer in this like mid-toned purple base. Definitely a very popular color combination. I don't know if Goblins and Ghoulies was like the first one to do it, but that definitely is like the shade that everybody is always excited about, but I just never really saw the hype for it. I mean, granted, I definitely know that it's because I just prefer lighter purples with a blue shimmer. Even last year, I did end up picking up a somewhat similar shade to Goblins and Ghoulies, which was Linby Designs Tentacool, just to see if, you know, I was kind of like missing out. And I just never ended up reaching for it. Like, I can acknowledge those are beautiful shades. They're very glowy, love the color combination, but I just know for me, I don't often wear those like mid-tone purples. So it's one of those polishes that I see and I just feel like that one emoji where it's just like standing there while everybody's like so excited for it. Then there's Clionadh Cosmetics Psilocybin, which I think is the original of the multi-chrome magnetic polishes. That one I feel like had everybody in a chokehold, and for good reason. I mean, it is so shifty with its like multi-chrome pigment, both in the magnetic shimmer and the background shimmer, I'm pretty sure. So it just looked like this oil spill on your nails, and you know, I'm sure like the videos did it way more justice than photos because you can just see how shifty it was. But again, it just was like one of those shades that wasn't really scratching that itch for me, even though I know everybody loved it and recommended it. If anything, I was more tempted by some of the Psilo siblings that launched, I think, last year, probably just because I liked the color combinations in the sibling polishes a little bit more. Technically, this is a boutique brand, not an indie, but a cult classic I don't have from ILNP is Fun House, which I'm sure so many of you already know because it was so disappointing to not see that comparison in the Hollow Taco David's Tea collaboration video. If you somehow have missed other people sharing comparisons, Funhouse is basically a dupe for that shade, so you know, don't worry about that. But I know that was so disappointing where like when I got the polishes in, I knew people were gonna be asking about Funhouse, and I felt so bad that I didn't have it because it's another one of those shades that I'm just like, it doesn't excite me. And I know that's almost so crazy to say because it's such a beautiful color. The finish is like so metallic and blinding, but I don't know, it is just one of those colors, finishes that like I just don't really wear that much. It's just like a little too bold for what I would go for, at least for like a full manicure, but I can imagine it would be really satisfying as like a bright pop of color in some nail art. The last indie cult classic that I don't have and I don't see the hype for is Bee's Knees Lacquer, a lion with a thorn in its paw. I know, I feel like it's almost blasphemous to say that because of how iconic that polish is. It even spawned so many siblings from Bee's Knees in like future releases, but I don't know, I feel like it's just one of those finishes that like we've seen before, and so I just don't understand the hype behind it. And I'm so sorry to say that because I know this polish is like so many people's prized possession. I can't even find it on Mercari anymore, but I feel like it was one of those polishes that was selling for upwards of $100, and I don't get it. I'm so sorry. Like, not to say that the finish is like ugly, but I just don't see how it's like so unique. Because even the color, I feel like it's something we've seen before. Maybe I'm just jaded. Maybe I've just seen like too much polish or something. Like I just wasn't around for the initial hype. That's another one that I feel like also launched years ago. And so maybe back then it was more unique, but with how saturated the indie market is these days, it doesn't feel as unique, you know? So now talking about some shades that I did eventually add to my collection, but ended up destashing, these first couple are from ILNP. Now, granted, this was years ago, like at least 8 years ago maybe, so I don't know if I would feel the same about the polishes if I had them now, but some of the earlier Island P letdowns that I experienced were shades like Black Orchid, which I feel like back then was the Island P shade to have. I mean, even now, like I went back to the website and that polish has like 2,000 reviews, while other polishes from back then maybe have a couple hundred. But I just remember being on like early nail Instagram and just seeing swatches of this polish and it just looking so vampy and gorgeous. But I think it just was like either too dark or like, I don't know if too muddy was like the right thing, where it just like didn't really shine or pop like the website photos. And I do remember some people also expressing that, but for the like overwhelming majority, it was definitely like a beautiful shade that was always recommended. I definitely like it in theory, but I would love to see like more recent swatches of it to see if it's worth like getting again. In a similar vein, I also remember destashing Diablo, which is like the super dark oxblood red. That was another one that I'm just like, I feel like it's not really living up to the hype for me. I don't fully remember if, again, that one was just like too dark or just like not red enough, where maybe it leaned a little too burgundy, so it like almost blended into that purple like Black Orchid. And it's kind of in a way like similar, I think, to Holo Taco's Crimson Void, sort of looking like Dead Petals from their Dark Rainbow collection, while the swatch photos of Crimson Void are like this really dark, like true red, you know, like there's no purple. And so I think that's kind of what I was expecting from Diablo, and I just didn't really get that. And this last Island P, I do still have. I haven't destashed it yet, but I'm like thinking about it, and I am talking about Sweet Pea. You may remember I picked this up over Black Friday last year because I just felt like it was one of those cult classic shades that I was missing from my collection, because it's always like recommended whenever anybody is asking like, hey, I'm gonna do my first Island P order, what should I get? I feel like Sweet Pea is always one of the top recommended shades because it's just like, you know, a really pretty dusty mauve, kind of like a nice neutral nail. You know, it's not like super bold, like a very plain everyday shade, but with like that beautiful sparkle from that hollow flaky finish. So I was like, okay, well, surely I'm gonna like it, but I don't know, I think it's like a little too dusty or maybe a little too cool toned for my taste. But to be fair, I only wore it once, so maybe I just need like a little time for it to grow on me or something. I know Island P definitely has a pretty large range of these light neutrals and soft pinks, so maybe that one just wasn't the right undertone for me. But it just still sucks because it's like the one that is always talked about the most, you know? I know so many of you guys are already gonna know these next couple of polishes, but I still had to talk about them because they were just always recommended and talked about. The first one is none other than Sassy Sauce's Cockadoodle Doom. I know if this is your first time hearing this, it's crazy, like how could I? It is so beautiful, and it is, like don't get me wrong, I think this is a beautiful glowy polish, but the reason I ended up regretting buying it was because I knew I was duping myself and I just went ahead and did it anyway. I was upset with myself. I didn't want to have it in my collection because it just was a reminder of how annoyed I was at myself, but it is beautiful. I can fully acknowledge that. It's just, again, one of those like colors that I don't wear super often, and so I feel like I only really need like one or two in my collection, which again, I already had, so I just didn't need this extra one. If you don't already have this like mid to dark toned purple with a red shimmer, this is absolutely a fantastic one to have. These next two are PPU shades, and I'm sure you can already guess. The first one is Lumen's Glass Frog. I cannot express enough how disappointing this polish was, especially after seeing everybody and their mother like hype it up. Granted, it does look so beautiful, so glowy, like in the bottle, in the swatch photos, but at the same time, when I swatched it for myself, I was like, is this a joke? It is so impossibly sheer that it's basically a topper, and I was just so frustrated with like how little it gave and just how many coats I had to do. Like, I don't think I still have the photo of it, but I remember wearing it in 4 coats, and it looked like how other shimmers would look like in 2 coats or maybe even 1 coat. So yeah, that was another super disappointing shade for me where, you know, I bought into the hype, right? Like, it was one of those that had released originally during Polish Pickup, and then it came back around for Rewind, and that's when I grabbed it, only to be let down. So it's a shame, but you know, if you love it, I'm happy for you, but please let me know if you also were disappointed at how sheer it was. And speaking of Rewind, the polish that I grabbed last year that I was so looking forward to, only to be let down, was Ethereal's Ether Dragon. I was like being haunted by the swatches that I would see where, you know, like I'm just on my explore page, and so I'll see the swatch without the bottle, so I'm like tapping into it like, oh my god, what is this shade? And it was always Ether Dragon, looking so glowy, so gorgeous, especially in like lower or indirect lighting. I had even tried buying a couple of shades to like scratch the itch of that shade, but it just like didn't compare. And so once it came back for Rewind, I was like, oh my gosh, I am being blessed. I have another chance to get this one, only to swatch it and then realize that the shimmer looks so similar to Polish for Days Lush. I know that seems so weird because when you see them side by side in the bottle, Lush is like purple, but the shimmer is almost the exact same, especially when you're in like lower or indirect lighting, which is what I was looking for from Ether Dragon. So that was just disappointing because, you know, I realized I pretty much already had what I was looking for, but I guess I wasn't thinking about it because whenever I think of Polish for Days Lush, I always like think of it being purple, you know? But seeing it in indirect light where the shimmer kind of like takes over, it pretty much looks like Ether Dragon. So yeah, I definitely do prefer Lush anyway because of that purple base, so I ended up, you know, getting rid of the Ethereal. And lastly, for the cult classics that I eventually added to my collection that I did think were worth the hype, the first one that I have is Island Peas Eclipse. I know I am so late to this party because this launched like so long ago and everybody already knew back then how iconic this polish was, because if I'm not mistaken, I'm pretty sure this was like the first black to red multi-chrome. So it took the polish world by storm. It was so stunning, but this was just, you know, a time before I cared about multi-chromes. So I again was left feeling like that emoji just standing there while everybody else is freaking out over how beautiful this polish is. But now I get it. I finally had picked it up over Black Friday and I'm just like, this was missing from my collection and I'm just so happy to actually have it now. And this is another one that like is so popular that, you know, it spawned a lot of other brands doing their versions of black to red multi-chromes. And while I do like, you know, some of them that have like slightly different finishes, there's something about Island Peas Eclipse being like the first one and being that cult classic that, I don't know, it's just more satisfying to have that one in my collection. So like I mentioned, Polish Pickup is a great time to pick up some cult classic shades. And last year I had picked up Dreamland Lacquer's Shake Your Shamrock. This is an obnoxious neon green shade with this glowy blue shimmer. I just love it so much. I mean, obviously everybody loves it, but I initially skipped out on it because I was like, oh, well, you know, it's not one of those greens I usually wear. And so it definitely was crossing my mind, like, am I really caving into the FOMO? Like there was a little bit of that, I won't lie. but I do not regret it at all. It is absolutely gorgeous, and it just impressed me again with how glowy it was, considering how pigmented the base is, where I mean, sure, I did need 3 coats to like build it up, but it is like way more opaque than your typical shimmer formula that usually has a much more sheer, almost jelly-ish base. So I feel like this was the polish that kind of changed something in my brain where I'm like, oh, okay, so shimmers don't always have to be so freaking sheer all the time. Like they can be pigmented, but still so glowy. I feel like they have released like a sibling or two. Maybe there was like a blue version and then a purple one. I didn't end up grabbing those because I'm like, oh, well, I already have something more similar, you know, to the blue or the purple. The green is definitely way more unique to my collection, but I still would love to see like even more colors in that super pigmented, glowy formula. Now, I know a lot of you are probably still upset over what I said about bee's knees and a lion with a thorn in its paw. So to balance that out, let me gush for a little bit about Bee's Knees Dumicorn. This is another iconic shade that spawned so many siblings after it launched, but the original is this really beautiful like lavender jelly base with a glowy green shimmer. It's just giving all those like magical, ethereal, fairy vibes that you know I love. Huge shout out to Alyssa from Polished Bookworm for sending this to me because it was just one of those lemming polishes, and I know these days it's like maybe not that unique. I mean, even when I swatched it for the first time, I realized that it was very similar to this oldie polish that I have, I believe called Lavender Mint, and I was like, oh, okay, these are like really, really similar, but there's still something about having like the OG Dumicorn in my collection that it just satisfies me in a way that I cannot explain. And this goes back to how I mentioned earlier with Cockadoodle Doom being that like mid-tone purple with a red shimmer where it's gorgeous, but I just don't wear it often enough, so I don't need like several different versions of it. But when it comes to shades like Dumicorn, Lavender Mint, any other light purple with this glowy green blue shimmer, I wear them often enough that I can justify actually having like multiple versions, but maybe that's just, you know, me trying to justify it to myself. So that wraps up the cult classics I don't have in my collection, along with a few that I do. As always, I would love to know your thoughts on this video. I really had fun just like sitting down and talking about nail polishes and how iconic some of these shades are. Obviously, there are so many other cult classics that like I didn't talk about because I already talk a lot, and so I didn't want it to be too rambly. So I would love to know what are some of your cult classic shades that you either have or don't have, and if you don't have them, why not? You know, were you just like, I don't see the hype, or did you already have something similar in your collection? Make sure to let me know down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!